What is it about some music that makes us want to dance, tap our foot, or bop our head, while other music just doesn't move us in that way? In this video, we're calling it groove. We're going to be referencing scientific research as well as deconstructing popular dance music of different cultures to figure out what groove is made of, and more importantly, how we can create it. We'll start with the basics and finish with the nuance of how a few milliseconds or a few decibels can make or break a groove. Most music education focuses on harmony, chords, scales, intervals, and so on. But when it comes to rhythm, we're often told, just feel it. It's understandable because rhythm is more intuitive than our convoluted system of harmony. But that doesn't mean we can't benefit from deconstructing rhythm the same way we deconstruct harmony, especially if you're a music producer constructing beats from scratch. If you're not playing every part of a beat, you might be missing out on some of the subconscious decisions that live musicians make when they're just feeling it. In this video, I'm breaking down groove into 5 aspects: syncopation, counterpoint, swing, pocket, and dynamics. According to David Huron, syncopation is a form of violation of metrical expectations that are established in the listener's mind as a function of the temporal regularities in a music signal. Let's simplify that. Most music is usually divided into regular intervals of time called a meter, such as 4/4 time. That structure provides a framework for a lot of predictability. Without syncopation, you generally expect notes to line up with the grid of 4/4 notes per measure, especially when a phrase begins or resolves. But playing with those expectations in subtle ways can create interest and groove in music. In this research study, Sioros and company took melodies without syncopation and added syncopation to them in a very formulaic way. Here's an example of a melody without syncopation. And here's an example of how they added syncopation according to their formula. Basically, they anticipated or delayed certain notes by a smaller subdivision of the beat. They played synthesized recordings of the melodies with a click track to 28 people of various nationalities and asked them to rate the groove of each example. Groove was defined as the sensation of wanting to move some part of the body in relation to some aspect of the music. In the end, they concluded that gradually increasing the syncopation also increases the desire to move, but only up to a certain point beyond which desire decreases. This finding has also been confirmed in other studies with different methods, like this one, that found similar results by playing funk drum breaks to the participants with varying degrees of syncopation. This graph shows how more syncopation resulted in a higher groove rating until a certain point, where the groove rating went down from too much syncopation. I'm a little worried about this participant though. Someone should check in on them. One interesting conclusion from the study was that groove may be affected only by the syncopating notes that clearly contradict our metrical expectation at metrically strong positions at the beat level, and not by the weaker syncopations at the subdivision of the beat. This was because they found that the syncopations of the 2nd and 4th beats didn't have as much of an impact on the groove rating as the syncopation of the 3rd beat here. In this study, whenever a weak beat was syncopated, the preceding and following beats were preserved. They noticed that this had the effect of enforcing a meter rather than contradicting it. You might notice that shortening the 2nd and 4th beats adds emphasis to the 1st and 3rd notes, reinforcing them as strong beats. While this was true in their examples, I think their conclusion is potentially misleading. They didn't explore the combination of syncopating a weak beat and the preceding or following strong beat. And I'm not just splitting hairs, because syncopating 2 or 3 beats in a row happens all the time in Latin American dance music. One popular rhythm in Cuba is the Cascara that you can hear played on the hi-hat in this example.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
You can hear this rhythm in other genres of music too.
Chickadee China, the Chinese chicken.
Let's apply this type of syncopation to our example and compare it to the syncopation applied in this study. Rather than predictably alternating between syncopated beats and unsyncopated beats, we're alternating between syncopated and unsyncopated groups of beats. In my opinion, applying syncopation to weak beats in this way does contribute to the overall groove. In Sioros' study, the first and third beats are perceived as strong beats. However, in some styles of music, the second and fourth beats are perceived as stronger. Let's hear a samba, for example. In samba, you'll hear the second and fourth beats being emphasized by the surdo, which is like a bass drum. That slower backbeat isn't really syncopated at all, but the smaller subdivisions in between are very syncopated, making the music groove. For example, listen to the pandero with the surdo. Another interesting thing I wish Sioros' study explored was the impact of having the click track playing. From personal experience, I know that the contrast of a non-syncopated rhythm like the click track with a syncopated rhythm can contribute to a groove. That's sometimes called rhythmic counterpoint. In Sioros' example, a 4/4 meter provided a framework for predictability from which we subverted the listener's expectations. In many genres of African and Latin American music, a steady meter like 4/4 doesn't provide that framework of predictability. A clave does. Wikipedia defines clave as a rhythmic pattern used as a tool for temporal organization. That sounds like it can describe a meter, like 4/4 time. But unlike 4/4 time, a clave isn't divided into even beats. One of the most common examples is this rhythm, often called a son clave. If we delay the last note of this measure, it's called a rumba clave. If we move this note over, we get a clave heard in Brazil, often called the Brazilian clave or the bossa nova clave. Using a clave as a rhythmic framework allows musicians to create rhythmic counterpoint without always needing to play off beats. If a clave is being played or implied, another instrument is only syncopated if anticipating or delaying a note of the clave rhythm, which may or may not be on an offbeat. Listen to this example of a Cuban guaguancó. Listen first for the rumba clave, then listen for a variation of the cascara, then listen for the rhythmic counterpoint made by the syncopation of the vocals and congas. In my opinion, this type of syncopation is far more sophisticated and interesting than syncopation based entirely on the regular meter like 4/4 time. The clave provides the repetitive predictability of a meter, but with more interest than a monotonous repeating quarter or eighth note. Now you may have noticed in the guaguancó or the samba that the notes weren't metronomically perfect. By that I mean they didn't fit perfectly in the grid of either eighth notes, quarter notes, or triplets. Sometimes they were somewhere in between. We called that swing. Let's take another look at the rumba clave. I wrote it out in 4/4 time, but that's not really how it's usually played. Usually it's somewhere between that and this version in 6/8 time. Listen to this recording of the clave I made. It starts out strictly in 4/4, then gradually morphs into the 6/8 version. We call 4/4 time a duple feel because 4 is a multiple of 2, and we often call 6/8 a triplet feel because you can feel the subdivision of the beat in groupings of 3. The push and pull between duple and triple feels, or the perception of both being played simultaneously, can create rhythmic interest. You can hear the duality of the two easily in Peruvian festejo. Listen to the festejo rhythm. Then listen to it with a hi-hat playing 4 notes per measure, then listen to the hi-hat playing 6 notes per measure. They both sound like they fit because the musicians are playing somewhere in between the two. A lot of the time, each instrument in a band is playing with different amounts of swing, leading to what musicians refer to as a pocket. If one instrument is a little early and another a little later, they create a pocket of time between them. You might think that would sound like a mistake, but it actually sounds great when it's consistent and intentional. For this reason, producers sometimes add a clap sample to their snare on a backbeat. The main reason is that it creates a bigger pocket for the snare. Most clap samples aren't a single clap. That doesn't add much, but several people clapping close together creates a bigger pocket of time for the beat. This can help add weight to certain beats, making the groove more dynamic. Another reason why a pocket might be better than precise synchronization is that it gives an opportunity for different instruments to be heard. If instruments are playing at precisely the same time, you might not perceive them as being different. For example, 16 different oscillators with exactly the same shape, pitch, and phase will sound just the same as one loud oscillator. If I detune some and adjust their phases, we can hear the chorus of oscillators because of their differences. As Vijay Iyer put it, timing variations can allow an instrument that is sonically buried to draw attention to itself in the auditory scene. Thus, the presence of multiple instruments of similar timbres, as in West African drum ensemble or a large jazz ensemble, need not be viewed as enforcing the subordination of individual identity. Individual musicians can improvise at this micro-rhythmic level to create an intentional give and take. This also serves an aesthetic function, in that it enhances the perception of different rhythmic groups as separate animate entities with distinct personalities. One common example of pocket can be found in jazz. A while back, NPR ran an article about what makes music swing, and the answer was a little surprising. I'm going to play two examples. Which one swings or grooves more to you? The difference is subtle, but apparently expert musicians were over 7 times as likely to rate the second one as having a more satisfying swing feel, though most weren't able to say why. The main difference is that the downbeats of the piano are delayed about 30 milliseconds in the second example, while the offbeats were not delayed. In another part of the experiment, the researchers also analyzed a database with over 450 recordings of jazz soloists, including performances by the likes of Dizzy Gillespie, Joshua Redman, and Charlie Parker. They found that almost all of them were using tiny downbeat delays relative to the rhythm section. Let's see if that's true anecdotally. I'm going to use AI to separate out the different instruments in this live jazz recording and compare their timing. To do this, I'm turning to this video's sponsor, LaLa AI. LaLa AI is AI software that lets you split a track into stems. But one unique thing about LaLa is that they have models trained on many more instruments than their competitors. Most other AI stem splitters let you separate out drums, bass, voice, maybe guitar, and then lump everything else into a stem called Other. But that other stem might have piano, strings, horns, electric guitar, synthesizers, and more. With LaLa AI, we can separate out each of those tracks. So for example, I can separate out the trumpet and piano from this jazz quartet. If I were using any other AI splitter on the market, piano and trumpet would probably be in the same stem. So the original track sounded like this. Now after using LaLa AI, I have 4 stems for drums, bass, piano, and trumpet. If you're interested in LaLa AI, check out the link in the video description. They even have a referral program that gives you free credits for referring a friend. Now if I take a look at the timing of the different instruments, I can see that the drums and bass are pretty locked in. Very little deviation in their timing of downbeats. Then the piano usually plays just a little behind them, and the trumpet is usually behind everybody. Now let's move the trumpet so that it's playing 30 milliseconds earlier and compare. The difference is subtle, but I think most would agree it felt better where it was before. When playing swing in a jazz setting, you're playing something in between straight eighth notes like this, and tied triplets like this. But in other genres of music, it's more complicated. For example, take a look at Brazilian swing. In the samba example from earlier, you'll hear a unique form of 16th note swing in the tambourine. The second note is swung kind of like in jazz, the third note is close to the grid, but then the fourth note is early, almost making it sound more like a reverse swing or a swung 8th note rather than a swung 16th note. So why does this sound good? Remember the first study where they concluded that syncopating the weaker beats reinforces the meter rather than contradicting it? Listen again to their syncopated version of When You Wish Upon a Star. Delaying the second and fourth quarter notes by an eighth note reinforces 1 and 3 as strong beats. The same thing happens in swing. By swinging the offbeats, we reinforce the downbeats. B.J. Ayer put it eloquently. An immediate consequence of the swing feel is that it suggests the next level of hierarchical organization. In conventional terms, the swung eighth note pairs are perceptually grouped into the larger regular interval, that is, the quarter note. If all subdivisions were performed with exactly the same duration, it would be more difficult to perceive the main beat. The lengthening of the first of two swung notes in a pair amounts to a durational accentuation of the beat. In the samba example, the perception of a swung eighth note helps reinforce the slower quarter note backbeat, like 1, a 2, 3, a 4. Let's look at another example. One of the most famous beats of all time is the Purdy Shuffle, played by Bernard Purdy. You can hear it on Home at Last by Steely Dan.
This tune was a good example of that. A lot of Bernard's hi-hat in this tune particularly is a real driving kind of.
You got the backbeat, you got double time. And you have it almost shuffle. Ooh, bing, back a buka, the buka, da 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 da. Ooh, ah, ah.
The Purdy Shuffle is another example of a groove with a strong backbeat. In other words, an emphasis on the slow 2 and 4, like 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's take a look at a measure of the Purdy Shuffle that I separated out from Home at Last by using Lala AI. If we analyze it, we'll see that he's playing a rhythm close to triplets, but not quite. The triplets are swung. Let's take a look. The first beat here is elongated. If I split a beat up into 12 subdivisions, then a triplet would be 4 subdivisions. But here the first note is 5/12ths of a beat, the second is 3/12ths, and the third is 4/12ths like you would expect from a triplet. Then in the next measure, it's a little different. It's more like 4.5, then 3, and 4.5 again. Once again, we hear an elongated last note of the measure like we did in samba. This helps emphasize that backbeat. You can hear a similar type of triplet swing in this Moroccan band. They're playing something close to triplets, but it's actually more like that 5-3-4 subdivision that Purdy played in his shuffle. You also hear a deep pocket created by the subtle differences in feel between the musicians. Another important thing to point out about the Purdy Shuffle is the dynamics. Bernard Purdy would play many of these subdivisions so quietly, he had to play the snare drum with his fingers instead of the stick. You can see how quiet these subdivisions are in the waveform, but they contribute so much to the groove. Let me show you what a difference the swing and the dynamics have on the groove. Here I have a synthesized version of the Purdy Shuffle in the style of NES 8-bit chiptune from my preset pack. You can see amplitude over time here in LFO 1. Now here's a version where every note is the same volume. So which one grooves more to you? Now this is an example of me manufacturing a groove similar to the Purdy Shuffle, but there are more accurate ways of capturing some of that magic. One of my favorite features of Ableton is the ability to apply a groove to MIDI. You can choose from the stock grooves, which include just about any percentage of swing, but you can also extract the groove from a live performance and apply it to your tracks. To demonstrate, let's apply this unique Brazilian swing to a synthesizer. If I right-click this clip and choose Extract Groove, I'll see it pop up in my groove pool. Now if I double-click my MIDI clip, I can apply that groove. Over here, I can adjust what percentage of quantization to that groove I want, and can even apply the dynamics of that clip as well. If my MIDI instrument is velocity sensitive, we'll hear a difference. All of a sudden, my synthesizer sounds alive. And with LaLa AI, you could pull out most instruments from a track and extract its groove like a Space Jam alien.
Wow! He did it!
I got it. I got his talent.
I think it's important to mention that while we can tweak a beat to groove a lot more in post-production, it never lives up to a soulful live performance. There's something special about different musicians playing together, listening to each other, responding in turn, and contributing to a groove together. You can't bottle that up and sell it, but you can escape the quantized grid, breathe some life into your beat, and get your listeners moving. A special thanks to this video's sponsor, LaLa AI, and to all my Patreon supporters. If you're interested in LaLa AI or presets for the Vital synthesizer, you can find links in the video description. Thank you for watching.